Well, good evening, and thank you for joining me for my first ever Assessing Your Prophetic Self book club. I am having a book club, and you all are part of it. Well, I thought it would be good to talk about quickly why I wrote the book. Now, anybody who has it, you're going to understand it better if you read chapter 2. If you've read chapter 2, it's going to give you some great answers, excuse me, as to why I wrote the book. But my biggest motivation came from realizing that we have to do some very tough changes. I personally think that the prophetic is going to go over through a major overhaul, and we're going to revamp many things concerning how it was introduced to the body of Christ, how it's become popular in the world, and how it is to go forward to compete against its adversaries and its rivals. We don't realize that the prophetic has competition and deeply entrenched, highly developed competition. And because of that, we're going to have to step up our game in many ways. And that competition is not just merely predicting the future, but it's exercising the supernatural powers that are inherent in the prophetic that go back to before the church. The one thing that I'm excited about, that I look forward to, is the reclassification of the prophetic as a science. If you read the book, and if not, you'll see it later on when you go through it. I have a section on why reclassify the prophetic as a science. The number one reason is because as a religion, it's pretty much kind of disparaged, tied to Christianity, and people's issues with Christianity doesn't help the matter at all. So the last reason, which I think is so important, and when you get off, those of you who teach prophets, train prophets, do a lot of research, when you get off, you should key in the psychic movement, because they're in every seat we have. While we're walking around through, I don't know, lobbies and parking lots and restrooms trying to give a prophecy of the word of the Lord, they have whole, full standing, highly profitable institutions, enterprises, businesses, services, and practices. And so we have a long way to go because we lost a lot of ground. I'm looking forward to what God will do with the prophetic going forward. My biggest concern, and which is why I wrote this book, my biggest concern has to do with whether or not we can get the new guard on the same page. So many people, because it was introduced in the church, many people are thinking that the prophetic is exclusive to the church. Well, that's definitely not true. The prophetic goes all the way back to Abel. When there was no church, there was no Israel, there was nothing but a small civilization in a tiny part of the world considered the cradle of civilization, or eventually became that. So we have to figure out what the prophets did before there was a church, before there was the gift of prophecy or the office of prophecy, and before there was Israel and the 8th century prophets and all of those kinds of things that have come to define and package the prophetic in its most restricted form. And that's really where I am. Many of us don't realize, many of the body of Christ, and even these young prophets don't realize the reason that they go to psychics is because they haven't found prophets that have been commensurate with those that made it into God's eternal work. They also don't realize that the prophets, the psychics, are handling all of that heavy lifting, that heavy spiritual work that we used to do in the church, that Jesus migrated from paganism, from witchcraft, sorcery, and all of that into the ecclesia. So we've got a lot of work ahead of us. I hope that I can see a good bit of it done, functioning, and in power before I leave this planet. But it's going to start with us reclassifying the prophetic as a science so that we can get into universities, it can be accredited, and all of the things that are required for the secular world to take us as a valid, sacred resource. And that's